The Last of Us Left Behind is a story DLC released on February 14th, 2014, and it is one of the greatest DLCs ever made. The DLC is only around 2 to 4 hours long depending on the difficulty you play on. I played Left Behind on Survivor and it took me closer to 4 hours. On release, Left Behind was $15. For the content provided, this is great value. In my opinion, it's not a matter of content to price, it's a matter of quality to price. I would rather spend more and get a product which feels like it respects my time as a player, as opposed to a game which drowns me in content. Something like Left Behind with a smaller scale manages to feel more complete and worthwhile than various other games that have released since. The Last of Us Left Behind is set in 2 periods of time. It follows Ellie prior to the commencement of the winter chapter of The Last of Us. We follow her as she explores a mall to find medical supplies for Joel. And to contrast this, we follow Ellie 2 weeks prior to the start of The Last of Us as she has an adventure through a mall with her friend Riley. The story between Ellie and Riley is a coming-of-age story reminiscent of Stand By Me. Stand By Me is a story of 4 boys going on an adventure to find a dead body, whereas Left Behind is a story about Ellie and Riley going on an adventure to explore a mall. It's a journey of self-discovery for our protagonists. In our short time with Riley, Naughty Dog really make you care about her. They do a good job of developing the relationship between Ellie and Riley. The thing about the flashback sequences in Left Behind is that there is a real sense of dread in the player, because you already know how it ends for Ellie and Riley. You know that they both get bitten. Naughty Dog do an amazing job of contrasting this dread with non-stop fun banter. It manages to at times make the player forget about the incoming dread through fun banter and gameplay sequences where you get to know Riley. The writing in Left Behind feels amazing, and the dialogue is stuff teenage girls would actually say to each other. The DLC opens with a quick recap of what happened prior to the events of the DLC. It recaps the end of the college campus section of The Last of Us to remind the player about the events preceding. It's an interesting way to lay the foundation for when Left Behind takes place in relation to the original game. It firmly establishes that Left Behind is preceding the winter chapter of the original game. It's a story that didn't need to be fleshed out, but ultimately ends up enhancing the original game. This is something any good DLC will accomplish. A DLC should always be a piece of content which adds to a game in a substantial way without being too important as to affect future content. We then cut to Ellie asleep in a Fedra military school, a setting which represents structure and learning. She's woken up by Riley, who sneakily opens her window and enters the room. This opening sequence with Riley is used to quickly establish their dynamic and the current circumstances of their relationship. You get the feeling that they are both very close with each other but have recently become estranged. We are then pulled forward to present day, where we see that Ellie has managed to get Joel to a mall. Here, she will stash him in a secure location until she can scour the mall for medical supplies. We are then given control of Ellie, and are able to traverse the mall for ourselves. The mall in the present sections of the game represents survival, whereas in the past sections it represents fun and discovery. We are directed towards a nearby pharmacy. We spot some medical supplies to the right of the store behind a locked door. We need the key. We then leave the pharmacy and explore the nearby record store. In the record store, we encounter Spores and a decrepit clicker leaning upon a wall. We interact with this clicker and are greeted with the pharmacy key. We backtrack to the locked door and unlock it with the pharmacy key. Here, we open the supplies in front of us, only to be met with disappointment. But not all hope is lost, as Ellie notices a helicopter in some wreckage of the mall. Ellie is now determined to make her way to this helicopter, and we flash back to simpler times. Ellie and Riley are now making their way towards a mall. Something I really enjoy about this portion of the game and The Last of Us in general is the environmental storytelling, and how the characters within the world can interact and comment on it. This is evident in this section where we explore a decrepit building and make our way to the mall. One amazing contrast I love between Ellie and Riley in Left Behind is how Ellie represents structure. She's very apprehensive about going on this adventure, whereas Riley, since she joined the Fireflies, now represents freedom. It's an attempt to push Ellie away from structure and towards freedom. We have finally made our way to the mall. We've got 2 options. We can explore a little bit and see some optional conversations, or beeline it to the costume shop. The costume shop is an amazing portion of the game because it's all character based. The entire section boils down to two teenagers goofing around in a costume shop making stupid jokes. What's more endearing than that? The worst part about this sequence is that not everyone will take the time to interact with everything to get the full experience. Here's one of my favourite moments in this sequence.
Will Ellie ever be as funny as me?
Oh, please. I'm like 10 times funnier than you.
He said, not in this existence. Hey, it wasn't me. Skeleseer said it.
Well, Skeleseer can suck my dick.
We continue making our way through the mall until Ellie and Riley come up to two cars sitting in the middle of the mall. And like any teenagers would, they decide let's have a competition to see who can destroy all the windows on their respective cars first. Ellie has this in the bag, as in her own words,
Are you kidding me? I'm like the Brickmaster.
if Ellie wins, she gets to ask Riley a question. And if Riley wins, she gets to ask Ellie a question. And because Ellie is the Brickmaster, she wins of course. The result of this section has two outcomes. Naughty Dog and their attention to detail is insane. They put in dialogue for if Ellie or Riley wins the brick throwing contest. Both of these scenes overall serve the same purpose, but it's still a nice detail that they didn't have to include. You're given a few options as to what you can ask Riley. Player choice is something that will always be appreciated because it can help you become more invested in the characters and the ongoing story. I chose to have Ellie ask why Riley lashed out. She was simply confused and she needed space to figure things out. The dialogue, especially in this conversation, is hinting about Ellie's relationship with Riley being deeper than the player may have initially thought. If Riley wins the brick throwing contest, the conversation plays out very differently. Riley will ask what it will take for the two of them to be cool again. By having Riley ask this question, it shows that she really wants to put in the effort to repair their relationship. Ellie initially responds with a sarcastic answer about spaceships in an attempt to deflect the question and diffuse the tension. She eventually relents and says that just keep doing what you're doing because it's working. This conversation also lightly hints at their relationship being deeper than the player may have initially thought. We then progress deeper into the mall and Riley turns the power on, revealing that most places do still have electricity, it's just that it needs to be turned on at the breakers. I really like how Naughty Dog uses the mall setting to juxtapose the two different periods of Ellie's life. Her last experience in a mall was one that filled her with joy and ended in sorrow, whereas her current experience is one of urgency and dread which ends in relief. Ellie and the player are then brought back to reality, where we walk through a doorway labelled maintenance and through a hallway. We attempt to power it up but are sorely disappointed to find out that it needs fuel. We pick up a nearby red drum which we can use to siphon some gas out of a nearby truck, but before we do that we have a tense combat encounter. The enemies in this combat encounter were stalkers, which made it even more terrifying because they know where you are at all times and will attempt to flank you. When stalkers get close to you, it's terrifying. My favourite strat for dealing with them was throwing a brick at them and stabbing them to start off with. This would reward me with ammo to deal with the other 3 stalkers. After the stalkers have been dealt with, we can then siphon gas from the second truck and take it back to the generator to power it up. However, there is a wire loose, electrocuting the water, meaning if we go in there, we're going to be meeting Frank Grimes.
Well, I don't need safety gloves because I'm Homer Simpson.
Our only option then is to try a gate, which was locked prior to the electricity being turned on. Now that the generator is powered up, we can now enter this door and climb up onto the vents above to make our way to the other side. We then have a stealth encounter in a store, which we can quickly sneak through to make our way back to our original goal. A second locked gate which can help us reach the crashed helicopter. We can now climb up and reach the helicopter where we finally find the medical supplies we've been searching for. In this scene, Ellie is really relieved and finally, seemingly, has a sense of hope in her dire situation befalling her. We then cut back to Ellie and Riley entering a room, and in the room is a carousel. We hop on for a ride. It's a nice fun moment for Ellie where she just gets to enjoy being a teenager. Proof that what would be seen as a small moment to us is a huge moment of joy for them. Riley then gifts Ellie another pun book. You're given the option of how many puns you would like to do, and because we're looking to start Ellie's stand-up comedy career, we're going to do as many of them as possible.
You ready?
All right.
I heard 2 peanuts walked into a park. One was assaulted. It's not that the guy didn't know how to juggle. He just didn't have the balls to do it. Newspaper headline reads, "Cartoonist found dead at home. Details are sketchy."
Then we can head over towards the photo booth. It's a very interactive section for the player. The player is given the option of various poses that can be used to express the relationship between Ellie and Riley. We make our way to an arcade. This arcade only has the best games because they have Jak X Combat Racing. It's here where Ellie laments that the game she really wants to play doesn't work. Riley isn't having that and aims to make her friends' dreams come true. She has Ellie visualize the game and imagine it. This is a small moment which ultimately means a lot between Ellie and Riley. The game is very obviously a reference to Mortal Kombat. In the aftermath of this, Ellie suggests it is time for her to get rid of freedom and return to her life of structure at the military school. Riley then reveals that this is her last night in Boston. The reason she visited Ellie and took her on this adventure tonight was all because she wanted to see her best friend one more time before she left. She wanted to make up with her friend. It is quickly revealed that Riley risked her life to get some water guns for Ellie. It's a small gesture showing that she really wanted to make this night memorable. The water gun fight tips the game's combat encounters on its head. Instead of it being a fight for survival between life and death, like in the main game, instead it's a fun fight with lots of levity. It's a fight which has no stakes and that makes it refreshing. Well, the aftermath of this results in Ellie and Riley dancing in the mall with loud music. The player immediately knows this is not going to end well. It's a moment of levity for the two characters where there is nothing there but the two of them. No responsibilities. It's here where Ellie confesses she doesn't really want Riley to leave. She wants Riley to stay here with her. And here, the two characters kiss. This is a scene which caused a lot of controversy when Left Behind first released. In all honesty, I don't see the problem with it. It's a moment of childlike love. It's two characters in the midst of discovering what they want, with both characters resolute on abandoning their homes, with Ellie abandoning the structure of Fedra and Riley abandoning the freedom of the Fireflies. Ellie and Riley are then interrupted by a horde of infected who run towards them. We then cut back to Ellie in the present as she awakes in the helicopter. On our way back to Joel, there is a combat sequence. This combat sequence is very different to any in the main game. There's both survivors and infected present. This allows the player to pit both against each other, and results in something that was absent from the base game that is a really cool interaction the player can trigger. These survivors are ones sent by David, cementing a further connection to the winter chapter. The present segment ends with Ellie leaving the mall with Joel signifying survival. It then cuts back to the past where we witness the resolution to that narrative. Ellie and Riley are running away from the infected. The two of them end up getting bitten as a nice parallel. They both decide to be all poetic and lose their minds together. Something that will happen to Riley, but will ultimately never happen to Ellie. The past section ends with Ellie staying in the mall with Riley, symbolizing an end for both of them. I really like how both stories parallel each other in the smallest ways, even down to their endings. An amazing thing I can appreciate about Left Behind is the meaning behind the title and how it relates to the story. The title Left Behind relates to both settings of the DLC, with Riley having become fully infected, leaving Ellie behind in the past, and Joel having been injured, leaving Ellie behind in the present. In conclusion, The Last of Us Left Behind is one of the best DLCs ever made. It's a focused story that adds to the main game without being too important for anything outside of that. It knows the story it wants to tell and doesn't try to stay any longer than is required for the story. Left Behind, in my opinion, manages to tell a very complete story. And that is why Left Behind is one of the greatest DLCs ever made. If you've watched this far, I really appreciate it, and hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe to see more future video essays and retrospective content.